Hello, this was the second lecture for ethics class for the spring semester 2023. When I was reviewing the first lecture, I realized that I left a couple of things out. I did not tell you what my own educational background is, so I will do that now. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Colorado. And there I got a double major in philosophy and in history. I focused a lot on continental European philosophy and then also on modern European history. After I graduated in 1995, which I'm sure is before most of you were born, if not all of you, I went to graduate school at the University of Colorado Denver campus. And there I completed a master's program in interdisciplinary humanities, where I focused on the intersection of philosophy and history. And I wrote my master's thesis really on the philosophy of history, especially the question of how historical knowledge is possible. After I completed my master's program, I started a PhD program in philosophy at the University of Southern Illinois in Carbondale, and unfortunately, I did not finish that one. And I have also done some coursework in the pastoral school for the Diocese of Chicago in Mid-America. So that's part of the church that I work for. So now you know a little bit about my academic background. I have been teaching at Finlandia since the spring semester of 2021. So several, and each semester I have taught this course in ethics. So I've got a lot of experience helping students very much like yourself understand this information. In this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about what ethics is. We all have, I think, by the time we get to college, we have some kind of concept of ethics, that we are doing something. We have a sense of what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing to do. And so ethics, broadly speaking, is how we live out our moral life in the world. So it's how do we make our choices between right and wrong. And I think a lot of times we don't think about those choices. We just react. We have a sense of what's right and we have a sense of what's wrong, and we act out of that sense without really knowing where it came from. Now, a lot of us, myself included, are part of a religious tradition, and we might say that ethics comes from religion. Well, this is a good and very old answer. And this was an old answer even at the time that our course starts. So we're going to start our course very soon by reading the philosophy of Plato, who lived in the 4th century BC. And already at the time of Plato, the concept that ethics comes from religion, or that morality comes from religion, was already old then. And it's something that Socrates, who is both a historical person and a character in the dialogues of Plato, Socrates is going to react to that. He's going to suggest that maybe that's not the only thing that should be in play, that tradition or religious tradition is not the only thing that should be operative when we're trying to figure out what the right course of action is. So the oldest moral codes are exactly that. They're moral codes. They're lists of rules and they're lists of laws. And there are some examples. One would be like the Law Code of Hammurabi, which is one of the oldest law codes ever written. And then the other, which is slightly newer, although not a lot newer, that most of you are likely familiar with, is like the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, or that's found in a couple of different books of the Old Testament. These are moral codes, right? And these are rules. And oftentimes these rules are proscriptive. They tell us what not to do, right? The Ten Commandments tells us, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal. right? Sometimes they're prescriptions, right? Thou shalt honor thy father and mother. But most of the time, they're proscriptions. They tell us what behaviors are not allowed. What these old moral codes don't do really is focus on why. Why is it important, for example, to honor your parents? Well, Moses doesn't tell us that. Why is it important to follow rules? Well, the religions don't tell us that. Sometimes there's a suggestion that if you don't follow the rules, that you're going to be punished. But most of us, when we're acting out of a sense of moral or ethical conviction, we're not doing it because we're afraid of being punished. We might say that we are. We might say to our friends, well, we can't do that because we might get caught. But that's not generally really what the motivation for our action is. A lot of our questionable moral activity happens in private, right? That it's not a question of getting caught. It's not a question of getting punished. It's a question of doing the right thing even when nobody is looking. And I think that most of us have that sense, that we have the sense that the right thing to do is the right thing to do even when nobody is looking. And our sources of morality, they can come from our parents, they can come from our schooling, they can come from people in our lives like coaches or ministers, or often they'll come from friends or grandparents or aunts or uncles. They come from those people in our lives, and we internalize our morals. But often we don't really question where they came from or why they work or what the principles are behind them. And so when our class starts by reading the philosophy of Plato, that's the world that Plato is coming into. He's there in that situation where ethics and morality was received tradition, where what was important was the law. And the law really was the very definition of doing the right thing. Now, in America, we live in a culture where we can understand already at the outset that obeying the law and doing the right thing are not the same. We have cultural heroes that we all look up to who did the right thing by not obeying the law. So one of those we mentioned is in our syllabus, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He did not always obey the law, and when he didn't obey the law, he did it in order to do the right thing. We can also think of Gandhi in that way. But more than that, we can think of the founders of our own country. People like Alexander Hamilton or Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. These were people who started our nation, and in many ways are still important cultural figures for us, who were rebellious. They broke the law. The partisans at the Boston Tea Party broke the law, but they did so because they thought that it was necessary to break the law in order to do the right thing. So this is something that I think Americans understand. Americans understand that this concept that doing the right thing and following the law are sometimes things that are in conflict with each other. And I think that while Plato didn't see necessarily the conflict between doing the right thing and following the law, he did think that we needed to understand what the right thing was through the use of human reason. And this is one of the reasons why we start with the Euthyphro, because the Euthyphro takes this concept of piety, and most of us don't know what piety is because we live in a country where public religious observance is not common, right? But piety is the right feeling towards God, or the right feeling towards divine things, or the right feeling towards the gods. And with the right feeling, of course, comes the right actions. And this is what the Euthyphro is about, and you'll see that. And we're going to talk more about the Euthyphro in another lecture. And that lecture will be one that I recorded several months ago in the same room, but when the weather was nice. So Plato and Socrates and these Greek philosophers were doing something new. They wanted to understand what morality was, and they wanted to understand what ethics was. Excuse me. They wanted to understand these things in terms of reason. Their idea was that it's not enough to be told by your religion. It's not enough to be told by your teachers and your coaches. It's not enough to be told by your aunts and your uncles and your parents what is right and wrong. That you should be able to understand for yourself what is right and what is wrong, and you should be able to do that through the use of human reason. The wonderful thing about this, especially for people who live in an age such as ours, where we are, in the throes of constant technological and political and economic change, is that it can be hard to figure out what the application of the rule is. We can't always apply a custom that we have for a way of dealing with something in the right way, because the world changes so quickly. And because applications of rules during times of change, or applications of customs and traditions during a fast-moving civilization can be difficult, it's even more important for us to understand the principles behind things, so that we can always reason our way to an answer when we're confronted with a difficult question or a difficult situation. And so this is why we study ethics as a part of philosophy, so that we can understand the reasons why. And so when we are looking at the Euthyphro, that's what we want to focus on, is how is Socrates using reason to clarify the ethical questions that Euthyphro is concerned with. Now, at this point, I want to say a little bit about the scope of the class. And I know that I said that during the syllabus, and we went through and talked about all the people that we were going to talk about, but we didn't talk about the other part, right? So over the ages, philosophers have come up with several ways of conceptualizing the reason behind ethics and morality. And there's three main ways that they have done this. Okay? The first and the oldest is virtue ethics. And I wouldn't say that Plato was as sophisticated of a virtue ethicist as Aristotle, but I would say that he was kind of traveling along the same road. And if we had to classify him as a type of ethical philosopher, that we would classify him as a virtue ethicist. Virtue ethics was fully developed by Aristotle, and we're going to be studying Aristotle in, next week. And what it is virtue ethics is premised on ethics or morality, or the way that you live in the world when confronted with these difficult questions, right? that reason can help you live a life that is happy, right? And this sounds simplistic, but it really isn't. The purpose of philosophical ethics for the people who are doing virtue ethics is to help everybody live a good life. And the person who lives a good life is going to be the person with good character. And so it's an ethics that's very much concerned with character and development. And this is this is the virtue ethics answer. So Plato was kind of an early virtue ethicist. Aristotle was a virtue ethicist. Later on, we're gonna cover the Stoics. The Stoics were virtue ethicists. Thomas Aquinas was a virtue ethicist, and there are still virtue ethicists around today. Right? They believe that ethics and the application of reason to ethical questions helps us to live the good life. That's what it means to be more fully human, or most fully human, is to be a virtuous person. That's one approach. The next approach that we're going to study in the class is going to be the approach of deontology. So deontology is the study of duty. And Kant, who is a German Enlightenment thinker, is the one who really developed this theory to its potential, really. If you go out on the internet and you kind of Google what is deontology, you're going to read about the deontologist is the kind of an ethical thinker who places a great emphasis on rules. And then when you read the premier deontologist, Immanuel Kant, you're not going to see a lot of rules. And so it can be really confusing to people. But Kant believed that human reason could reveal to you what your moral duties are. And it would reveal that to you in very much the same way that, human reason reveals the answer to a mathematics problem. That once we understood the concept of the moral law for Kant, which for him begins with universality, that then our reason could tell us how to act in different situations. And I'm not sure that I want to say much more about that now, just so that you know that it's out there. That virtue ethics is about having good character and leading the good life. Deontology is about understanding through your reason what the law is and acting in accordance with that law, doing what is reasonable all the time. And then the third major kind of theory of ethics is utilitarianism. And utilitarianism takes a different approach than either of the other two. So if the first one is about character development and the second one is about adherence to the moral law, then utilitarianism is about results. It's about taking a look at the anticipated results of a moral question and choosing the path that is going to lead to the best results for everyone. And you have to use reason to do that. And so ethics and the subject of our course really is about finding the different ways to use the tools of human reason to understand why the right thing is the right thing. And the first thing that we're going to take a look at in this regard is going to be the philosophy of Plato, because Plato is going to help us clarify this first point, right? Why is it that we need to bring our reason to bear on the question of ethics and morality? And then it's after Plato, then we'll see what is the first answer to this question in Aristotle. What is the next answer to this question in Epicurus? What is the next answer to this question in Epictetus? And that's going to be how our course is going to proceed throughout the course of the weeks of the spring semester. So I will see you again before, because the lecture on Euthyphro was recorded before now, last May.